Hi, I want to make a video today about some home truths which I think it's only fair and proportionate that I share and potentially take ownership of. I have for the last sort of 3 years been investigating what I believe to be a series of graphic and protracted institutionally governed and orchestrated sexual assaults against women and children by potentially hundreds or even thousands of different men across the UK. And I believe that this series of crimes has been taking place for a number of years, many years, potentially more than a decade or even more than 2 decades. I feel that every single one of the men and women that's been involved in these graphic and protracted sexual assaults should rightly serve prison time for what they've done. And I think that it's fair and proportionate that these people face legal consequences for the harrowing and destructive and visceral emotional scarring that this has caused to actually a number of different women, none of whom I shall name at this point for legal reasons. But the people who have committed the offences know exactly who they are, they know exactly what risk I pose to them, and they know in exactly what context they've committed these offences, which I allege and fervently believe to have taken place. I was just discussing the concept of institutional abuse with one of the service users in the lounge in Hayward Ward, and he put it to me, he said kind of quite crassly, and at the time I thought contemptibly, what about if women enjoy rape? And I said that's a fucking revolting thing to say. Nobody, obviously the definition of statutory rape is that consent is not given, and if somebody's not consenting and they've said no, then that kind of, there is no blurred lines or definition between one binary action of the absence of consent and the acquisition of consent when it comes to intimacy. I was revolted and sickened by what he said. He said to me, what about the movie Straw Dogs? The movie Straw Dogs is described here. I'll read it out for you. Sam Peckinpah's 1971 film Straw Dogs has been described by critics as a kind of Cornish western, transferring Peckinpah's usual concerns about violence and masculinity from the Wild West to the West Country of England. Dustin Hoffman plays an American professional, David Sumner, who moves away from the States to the Cornish village of his English wife, Amy, played by Susan George. However, the locals proved to be rather less welcoming than expected. The first couple's cat is killed, and then, when David is lured away to join a shooting party, Amy is raped at home by her former boyfriend, Charlie, and his accomplice. It was the complicated nature of the rape scene that led to the censorship difficulties for Straw Dogs. What starts off as a violent assault gradually transforms into a complex scene in which Amy appears to first accept and then respond to the attack. Her seeming acquiescence is then turned around dramatically when one of Charlie's friends decides to join in. The film climaxes with a pitched battle in which Dustin Hoffman's weedy academic picks off each of the villagers one by one after realising that violence is the only language such people understand. Quite apart from the fact that the rape scene involves elements of strong violence and nudity, Amy's complex reaction to the attack makes for uncomfortable viewing and could be seen, particularly if presented out of context, as a dangerous endorsement of the male's rape myth that women secretly enjoy being raped. The film was originally seen by the secretary of the BBFC, Stephen Murphy, at the post-production stage. Stephen Murphy recommended a number of small changes to the film to reduce its levels of violence, a reduction to the second part of the rape scene and the toning down of some of the climactic violence, in particular that involving a man trap. These changes were incorporated into the finished version, which was classified X without further cuts for cinema release. Although the film was popular at the box office, it attracted a wrath of a number of leading critics who saw the film's presentation of violence as gratuitous and its attitudes to violence, i.e. that even the most pacifist individual can justifiably be forced to respond with violence, borderline fascistic. The film was campaigned against by Mary Whitehouse's Festival of Light and banned by a number of local councils. During the early 1980s, Straw Dogs was made available on home video, and the in the original cinema version prior to the introduction of the Videos Recording Act in 1984, it was not necessary for video releases to be separately classified by the BBFC, and so Straw Dogs was released on video on the basis of its existing ex-cinema certificate. After the introduction of the VRA, it became necessary, however, for Straw Dogs to achieve a separate video classification certifying its suitability for home viewing. Under the staggered system for classifying the huge number of videos already on the market, it was necessary for English language films classified by the BBFC between the 1st of January 1970 and the 31st of December 1974 to receive a video classification or be withdrawn from circulation by March the 1st, 1988. Straw Dogs was therefore legally available on video in the UK, uncut and without a video certificate until March 1988. Along with The Exorcist and Death Wish, Straw Dogs was ultimately removed from video shops in 1988 because the BBFC's then director James Furman did not feel that it would be appropriate to classify this particular film for video release at that time. Partly, this was in response to a recent Hungerford massacre, which led to increased sensitivity about the video violence in general, but also because concerns about sexual violence in films had increased since the 1970s, with the BBFC being inclined now to take a far stricter and more cautious approach. Of particular concern was the fact that the new technology of home video opened up the possibility of scenes being played and replayed out of context. In the case of Straw Dogs, this was particularly problematic because Amy's ambiguous reaction to the rape could be viewed out of the wider context of the film, fueling the fantasies of potential offenders. In 1997, Straw Dogs was submitted formally for video classification. Unfortunately, the version submitted on that occasion was an edited version prepared for the American market, which lost most of the unambiguously unpleasant second rape. The cuts made for American distribution, which were intended to reduce the duration of the sequence, therefore tended paradoxically to compound the difficulty with the rape rather than lessen it. The audience was left with the impression that Amy enjoyed the experience. The distributors were finally offered an extensive cuts list totaling some 3.5 minutes at the beginning of 1999 as an alternative to rejection. By the stage cuts were agreed, however, the distributor in question had lost the rights to the film and was unable to consider making cuts requested. Straw Dogs was therefore rejected formally by the BBFC for the first time in March 1999. Meanwhile, the original uncut version of Straw Dogs was submitted for video classification by another distributor. However, on the basis that the BBFC could not very well pass a more complete version of the film so soon after rejecting an edited version, the version was also rejected. In 2002, the uncut version was submitted once again. By this stage, the BBFC had introduced new classification guidelines which placed greater emphasis on the right of adults to choose their own viewing. The BBFC showed the video to a leading clinical psychologist specialising in work with sex offenders and to a panel of members to the public. The response of the clinical psychologist was that the present version of Straw Dogs was not harmful and was not likely to encourage an interest in rape or abusive behaviour towards women. The psychologists agreed that the ambiguous first rape was in fact a fairly realistic depiction of a quite complex situation. They also agreed that by the end of the second rape, any general messages reinforcing rape myths were undermined by the lack of ambivalence shown in Amy's reaction to the second attack. It was also noted that Amy's flashbacks to her distressing experience later in the film further undermined any impression that she might welcome rape or that it has no serious effect on its victims. The psychologist commented that the way the scene was filmed in a relatively discreet manner with limited potential today for titillation. The issue of context was also important to the members of the public to whom the video was shown as part of a research exercise into the acceptability of images of sexual violence. A focus group of 26 people viewed Straw Dogs, with 20 people accepting 18 uncut as the most appropriate category, 5 suggesting only minor cuts, and only 1 favouring rejection. No respondent asked for major cuts of the kind required by the BBFC in 1999. Discussion in the subsequent focus group about the film was generally very positive, with most members finding it a powerful, compelling and well-made work. The controversial scenes were not considered to be a gratuitous exploitation of sexual violence. It was felt that the quality of the filmmaking and the narrative context allowed the director to explore through the same difficult and complex issues. Just going to go and shut my bedroom door because I don't want anybody else to be audible in this video and for me to be censored in the process of what I'm doing. So significantly, respondents saw the manner in which Amy copes with her experience also as essentially positive and concluded that the full version of the scene, as well as the flashback shown afterwards, reinforced the idea that rape is not to be taken lightly because of the serious effect it can have on individuals. No concerns about possible harmful effects were identified. The BBFC recognised that the rape scene in Straw Dogs has lost only part of its power over the years despite the age of the film. Nonetheless, in the restored version and in the light of the evidence of expert opinion, the BBFC's conclusion was that in 2002 the film had no significant potential to cause harm to viewers or through their actions to society as a whole. 2011, the BBFC was presented with a modern remake of Straw Dogs, this time set in the USA. Although the remake also features a version of the double rape scene, the presentation of sexual violence was considerably less problematic than in the 1971 version. Firstly, Amy's response to the first rape by her former boyfriend is less ambiguous. Secondly, the scene is presented without any breast nudity or other potentially erotic elements. Thirdly, the remake spends more time than the original, providing a clear backstory for Amy and her former boyfriend. The remake is classified as 18 uncut for a strong, bloody violence and one scene of sexual violence. So, I'm just going to be really open and honest. I was in a relationship for a long time, around sort of 2010, and we were together for a little while, and I split up with this girl. We had a pregnancy and a termination, and she had a second pregnancy which she miscarried whilst I was chefing, and she was a waitress at a restaurant, and she left the work that day because she was miscarrying, and I left work as well, and when we returned we were given a disciplinary hearing. I then lost my job as a result of trying to attend to my grieving partner who'd just miscarried our child, and they were very scrutinous about the fact that we hadn't shared with them the fact that she was pregnant, as if that was any of their business, and I was much aggrieved about the fact that I'd lost my gainful employment as a result of trying to support my girlfriend through having a miscarriage whilst being at a contracted shift of employment. We split up, and when we split up, my girlfriend got me a couple of books. One of the books that she got me was Straw Dogs. The book Straw Dogs is described here. It shares the same name as the movie, which I'd never heard of until just now when somebody mentioned it to me. The book is very different. Powerful and brilliant, Straw Dogs challenges all our assumptions about what it is to be human and convincingly shows that most of them are delusions. J.G. Ballard. From Plato to Christianity, from the Enlightenment to Nietzsche, the Western tradition that has been based on arrogant and erroneous beliefs about human beings and their place in the world. In his radical work of philosophy, John Gray sets out to challenge our most cherished assumptions about what it means to be human. Philosophies such as liberalism and Marxism enthrone humankind as a species whose destiny is to transcend natural limits and conquer the earth. Even in the present day, despite Darwin's discoveries, nearly all schools of thought take as their starting point the belief that humans are radically different from other animals. John Gray argues that this belief in human difference is a dangerous illusion and explores how the world and human life look once humanism has been finally abandoned. The result is an exhilarating, sometimes disturbing book that leads the reader to question our deepest held beliefs. I remember having conversations with my partner at that time about what kind of we discussed and deemed as a kind of manufactured consent. There were times when I went out and used to drink and take cocaine, and I'd crawl into bed at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I'd be wanting to be intimate with my partner, and there was certainly occasions where eventually she said, no, you stink of booze, you've been out spending all of our money on shit coke, you wanker, it's Sunday, you're going to be in bed all day and we're not going to get to spend any time together, the last thing I want to do is sleep with you. And there were times when that initial disinterest for intimacy over a period of an hour or an hour and a half or a couple of hours of us lying in bed together resulted in intimacy taking place. And I can remember having discussions about that when we split up. She got me the book Straw Dogs, and I think she might have been trying to drop me a hint. I've never heard of the film, and I hadn't until just today. She bought me another book called In Defense of the Enlightenment, which you can look at on Google or on Amazon. I think that everybody who's been involved in the rape of several women that I've been investigating should serve a custodial sentence for what they've done. For every single rape they should be sentenced, and for every single instance of child abuse they should face prosecution in a court of law. But it wouldn't be right if there's somebody out there that feels that I have ever had non-consensual sex with them or that I've been guilty of the same crime myself. With respect and honesty, I'm just making an open plea to any of the ladies that I've ever shared relationships with. If they feel that I've ever proceeded to be intimate with them without having gained consent, please contact me and I'll be happy to make a statement, and I'll be happy to proceed with any sort of prosecution against me for which you think might have been valid. If it felt that way, then that's kind of all that matters. I think, as a person who's trying to investigate potentially thousands of instances of rape over decades involving innocent women and children myself, I don't want for a second to be included within the demographic of the revolting and pitiful human beings who I'm persecuting and potentially trying to collate and collaborate evidence against. When my mother was dying, one of my very good friends, somebody who I'd known for many years, we were moving some sofas from number 12 Market Close down to another house in the street. And after the end of the furniture moving, we sat down and the subject of lottery winnings came up. And suddenly this friend of mine, his attitude kind of changed and he became very sort of pointed and spiky with me. And he said, well, a rapist won the lottery, right? And I don't know how controversial what do you think about that, Broads? I mean, what do you think? Do you think that's a kind of a controversial thing? Do you think, that a rapist should deserve to win the lottery? I broadly understand that I did win the lottery, and that money was disseminated amongst various people that I got close to. And at the time, I thought that my mum had been defrauded. She'd fallen ill very quickly. I paranoidly believed that she had been poisoned and that she was just sort of married off without being able to make a will, and my brother and I were left with nothing. And it was like during the process of my mum being in hospital that we were moving all this furniture to rejig and reorganise, redecorate the house ready for her return. And I never understood why this friend of mine had become so pointed and accusatory and why he'd used those terms, because at the time I wasn't really that aware of my situation, and I didn't have the intelligence that I've got now relative to the potential sequestering of a lottery jackpot win at a young age, and the dissemination of a large amount of money between my friends' family and, without prejudice, potentially even my girlfriends. But I understand why, if somebody felt that way, my friend might have felt that way when talking to me. And I'm pushing for prosecutions for every single person who has committed a rape or a sexual assault against this group of women and children I'm looking to defend. But it's just occurred to me this morning that, when I split up with my girlfriend, this girlfriend that I spent time with, many people will know who that is, but I'm not going to name her in this video for personal reasons. She got me this book, Straw Dogs and In Defence of the Enlightenment. And we spent a few months apart. Then I moved into a new house, a shared house in Bristol, and we struck up a relationship again for about 6 months. And we were very close. In fact, our relationship was probably better after we'd split up than it had been when we'd been travelling the world and we'd been living and sharing a flat in St Paul's in Bristol. But the symbolism of that book, Straw Dogs, has always eluded me up until today. And it made me remember the conversations we'd had about consent and the way that, there'd been a kind of borderline intermarital rape conversation that had been had with me, and I've not faced any consequences because of that. And this is just an open invitation. I condemn people who rape women, and I utterly condemn sexual assault, sexual violence, sexual humiliation, and any kind of sexual crime. And I'm campaigning and have been campaigning to try and put a stop to those actions and to try my best to bring the perpetrators to justice. But it wouldn't be right if I was guilty, or if somebody feels I was guilty of that crime myself, for me to be pointing the finger at other people. the pot calling the kettle black does not negate the fact that the pot and the kettle are both black. So this is just an open invitation to anybody, any person who I've ever been intimate with. If you feel that there was manufactured consent, or consent that was gained through coercion or pressure, or there was a resistance, or at any point there was a friction between me and you feel that that's caused you harm or emotional damage or distress or trauma, then please get in touch with me, because the information and the intelligence that I've been trying to gather over the last sort of several years related to what happened to my parents and what's happened to my siblings and what's happened to me also, is just as justified as anything that I might have done to anybody else. And I don't think it's right that I'm trying to put hundreds of people inside for decades for what they've done, whilst I might have been guilty of the same thing. And it wasn't until it was put to me this morning by quite a revolting conversation, a ridiculous point somebody put to me about the thesis of a film he'd seen called Straw Dogs. And as soon as he mentioned the film Straw Dogs to me, I said, oh my God, my ex-girlfriend bought me a book named Straw Dogs around 2011, and I read the diatribe that I've just read to you, and I explored the complex psychological, psychosocial and really harrowing graphic themes that film was controversially produced to atone to and thematically represent. And if you were trying to drop a hint, or if you do think that I've acted improperly, unfairly or criminally, then you have my utmost support in any action that you wish to take against me. And equally, if for any reason anybody else has any intelligence leading to prosecutions that might arise from the women and children that I've been acting to defend over the last few years, then I would implore you to act on that and in a similar method to myself, just come clean and be open about what may or may not have happened. I think that there's a stark, unfortunately, very binary difference in what may have happened in my relationships and what's been happening en masse in an institutional and orchestrated way and perpetrated by many different people. But two wrongs do not make a right, and I'm not going to sit here and point the finger at other people for a crime which somebody somewhere might feel that I'm guilty of. Just been watching the Pope this morning being buried and his funeral, and I'm very concerned that a lot of people are mourning that loss, and it's great that people are being respectful, and I wish everybody mourning the loss of the Pope my best wishes, and hope that with the benefit of hindsight and the clarity of a perspective of justice, humility and honesty, you accept my firm consolation that I definitely won't deny anybody who claims that they've felt that there's been a lack of consent in our intimate relationships, and I don't want to be condemning other people for crimes which I might even only in a completely partial and minor way, comparatively speaking, have been guilty of myself. It wouldn't be right, it wouldn't be fair, it wouldn't be justified for anybody to face prosecution for something which I may be guilty of myself. So you know who you are. There's been various people just trying to send me text messages and Facebook notifications to potentially try and censor me, as well as the person on the ward who started shouting. So maybe this video will get taken off YouTube. But if it doesn't, then please feel free to get in touch with me. If you think I've got a case to answer, then I will be open and honest. And if it's the way that it made you feel, then your feelings are justified, they're valid, just as valid as the victims of the severe and protracted multiple rapes that I've been looking to try and investigate, defend and prevent over the recent years. So yeah, hopefully this video won't get taken down off the internet, and if it does, then, you know, I'll just make another one.